Mr. Popper's Penguins by Florence and Richard Atwater. Chapter 3. Out of the Antarctic. What the excitement of having the great Admiral Drake speaking to him over the radio, and his curiosity about the Admiral's message to him. Mr. Popper did not sleep very well that night. He did not see how he could possibly wait to find out what Admiral meant. When morning came, he was almost sorry that he had nowhere to go, no house to paint, no rooms to pepper. It would have helped to pass the time. "Would you like the living room papered over?" he asked Mrs. Popper. "I have quite a lot of paper, number 88, left from the mayor's house." "I will not," said Mrs. Popper firmly. "The paper is now plenty good enough." "The paper now is plenty good enough. I'm going to the first meeting of the Ladies' Aid and Ministry Society today, and I don't want any mess around here to clean up when I get home." "Very well, my love," said Mr. Popper meekly, and he settled down with his pipe, his glove, and his book of Antarctic adventures. But somehow, as he read today, he could not keep his mind off the printed words. On the printed words. His thoughts kept straying away to Admiral Drake. What could he have meant by a surprise for Mr. Popper? Fortunately for the peace of mind, he did not have to waste very long to wait. That afternoon, while Mrs. Popper was still away at her meeting, and Janie and Bill had not yet come home from school, there was a loud ring at the front of the door. "I suppose it's just the postman. I won't bother to answer it," he said to himself. The bell rang again, a little louder this time. Grumbling to himself, Mr. Popper went to the door. It was not the postman who stood there. It was an expressman with the largest box Mr. Popper had ever seen. "Party by the name Mr. Popper live here?" "That's me." "Well, here's a package that's come air express all the way from Antarctica. Some journey, I will say." Mr. Popper signed the receipt and he examined the box. It was covered with the markings. "Unpacked at once," said one. "Keep cool," said another. He noticed that the box was punched all here and there with air holes. You can imagine that once he had the box inside the house, Mr. Popper lost no time getting in the screwdriver, for by this time, of course, he had guessed that it was the surprise from Admiral Drake. He had succeeded in removing the outer boards when, from the depth of the packing case, he suddenly heard a faint "ook." His heart stood still. Surely he had thought that sound of the Drake expedition movies. His hand was trembling so he could scarcely lift off the last of the wrappings. There was not the slightest doubt about it. It was a penguin. Mr. Popper was speechless with delight. But the penguin was not speechless. "Ork!" it said again, and this time it held up the flippers and jumped over the packing discards. There was a little snout, fellows about the 2.5 feet high. Although it was about the size of a small child, it looked much more like a little gentleman. With his smooth white waistcoat in front of and his long black tail coat dragging a little behind. His eyes were set in 2 white circles in black head. It turned its head from one side to another, and the first with one eye and the other. It examined Mr. Popper. Mr. Popper had read that penguins are extremely curious, and he stood to find out that's true. For stepping out, the visitor came to inspect the house. Down the hall, it went to bedrooms with its strange, pompous little skirt. When it or he, Mr. Popper, had already begun to think of it as he got to the bathroom, it looked around for pleased expression on his face. Perhaps, thought Mr. Popper, all that white tilling remains him from the ice and snow at South Pole. Poor thing, he might be thirsty. Maybe he's thirsty. Carefully, Mr. Popper began to fill the bathtub with cold water. This was a little difficult because the invested penguins kept reaching over and trying to bite the foxes with their sharp red beak. Finally, however, he succeeded in getting the top all filled. Since the penguin kept looking over, Mr. Popper picked it up and dropped it in. The penguin seemed not to mind. "Anyway, you're not shy," said Mr. Popper. "I guess you have heard of you playing around with those explorers at the pole." When he thought the penguins had enough for a bed, he drew out the stopper. He was just wondering what to do next when Janie and Bill burst in front of school. "Papa!" they shouted together at the bathroom door. "What is it?" "The South Pole penguin sent to me by Admiral Drake." "Look," said Bill, "it's marching." The delighted penguin was indeed marching with a little pleased note on his handsome black head. He was parading down inside of the bathtub. Sometimes he seemed to be counting the steps it took. 6 steps for length, 2 steps for width, 6 steps for length again, and 2 more steps for width. For such a big penguin, he takes awfully small steps, said Bill. Look how his little black coat drags behind. It almost looks as if it were quite big for him, said Janie. But the penguin was tired of marching. This time, when it got up at the end of the top, it decided to jump off the slippery curve. And it turned and without stretched flippers, tobogganed down on its white stomach. They could see that those flippers, which were black on the outside, like the sleeves of tailcoats, were white underneath. "Grook, grook," said the penguin, trying his new game again and again. "What's his name, Papa?" asked Janie. "Grook, grook," said the penguin, sliding down once more on its glossy white stomach. "It sounds like cook," said Mr. Popper. "Why, that's it, of course. We will call him Cook. Captain Cook."